welcome back to my channel. Today's case, 2 children vanish, mommy jets off to Hawaii with her new husband in tow. Vallow and Chad Daybell don't need any introduction at all. This doomsday obsessed couple is not just a story of missing children. It spans murder, religious fanaticism and deception at its absolute worst. But as always, I wanted to take you back to the very beginning of where everything started and where I think things went horribly wrong. So although this case is international news and most people have heard of it, I think a lot of people haven't. And you're going to find that the details in this case are extremely disturbing. So Chad Guy Daybell was born in August of 1968 in Springville, Utah. He was the oldest child of Jack and Sheila Daybell. Now, they were a very conservative and very religious family, and they ended up having 5 children, 5 boys. It was a happy childhood for Chad. He had a lot of freedom, and Chad enjoyed things like sports, music. Jack and Sheila taught their children to work hard, study hard, and all of his brothers went on to get graduate degrees. But not Chad. He was a little different. He didn't date much, and he eventually graduated from the private church-owned Brigham University. And while he was filing out an application for a master's degree, Chad heard this little voice in his head telling him that, well, he would not need any additional schooling to complete his life's mission. At just 21 years old, Chad Daybell spotted a familiar face in his brother's high school yearbook. And the photo belonged to 19-year-old Tamara or Tammy Douglas. She had attended the same high school as Chad, and although the two of them, well, they'd never really spoken before, that one image was enough for Chad to track her down. He asked her out, and things moved really quickly from there. The two of them were engaged, and not long after this, by 1990, they were married. And soon, they started a family of their own. Tammy gave birth to their first child, Garth, in 1993. They were just a regular couple, with Chad working as a cemetery sexton, which means basically that he took care of the graveyard. He would mow the grass, he would dig plots, and he was in charge of handling all the burials. It wasn't a very glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and it gave him a lot of quiet time to think. And that is exactly what Chad did. He had a very big imagination and a love for writing. So while he was out there surrounded by heads of the tombstones, he started coming up with stories. And these were mostly about near-death experiences, the end of the world, and spiritual battles between good and evil. And eventually, Chad started publishing these stories. In fact, his books focused on doomsday scenarios and religious themes. And they really caught on with some members in the LDS community. And it wasn't long before Chad became a self-published author with a growing fan base. And he believed that he had some kind of spiritual gift. His books portrayed the end times with several fictional characters, and they did end up causing quite a bit of controversy. And so Deseret Books actually stopped publishing Chad's work in the year 2003. And so, of course, Chad was not very happy about this whole story, and he decided that he was going to become his own publisher. And so, along with his wife, Tammy, they started Spring Creek Book Company. And this was about in 2004, and he continued to publish his novels. But not only that, Chad managed to find other authors whose books they were able to publish. And very soon, he had about 30 authors. So Spring Creek Books published about visionaries, and even near-death experiences. And these books became extremely popular. And so as the books grew in popularity, Chad was then asked to speak publicly, and he started spending a lot of time away from home. So after spending about 25 years in Utah, where he'd grown up, got married, raised his children, in the summer of 2015, Chad made the decision that he was going to move Tammy and their 5 children all the way up to Rexburg, Idaho. This is a small conservative town where a lot of the people shared the same LDS faith. Now, Chad himself described in his autobiography that his wife Tammy, well, she wasn't very happy about the move, but he said to her that he had a vision and that this is what God wanted, and she just needed to have faith and listen to him. So the family settled down in a very modest home in Salem. This was just out of Rexburg, and this is where he deepened his identity as a spiritual leader. He hosted podcasts and fireside chats, often featuring other LDS influences. So Chad really seemed to be doing well for himself. Now, I want to tell you about Vallow Daybell. Born Lori Noreen Cox, she was the 4th of 6 children to her parents Barry and Janice Cox. Lori's upbringing was very different than what Chad had. She was a typical California girl. She was very popular. She was a cheerleader in high school, and people described her as extremely beautiful. She also grew up in an LDS family, but Lori was always described as a little bit more rebellious. It's said that Lori started doing drugs in high school, and this is where she met her first boyfriend. His name was Nelson, and her family didn't like him at all. But Lori decided that she was going to run off. She married Nelson, and of course, her family did not approve because Nelson was not LDS. Not to mention the fact that she was very young. But of course, this relationship did not last long because Lori ended up moving in with her younger brother Adam. And he was living in Austin, Texas. So Lori met a man named William Lagonia, who she just brought back to her brother's place without even asking, and she told Adam that she and William, were going to live together in Adam's house. And Adam wasn't at all happy about this. He told Lori, well, that's not going to happen. I mean, it was his house, and so the pair of them left, they got married, and it was not a good marriage at all. You see, William, he would abuse and beat Lori up. Lori was not the kind of person to waste any time, and so she eventually decided to end the marriage. But now she was a single mother, and she had a child to support. And so Lori started working at a hair salon. So one day, a male client named Joe Ryan made an appointment to get his hair done, and it was very obvious that he was in love with her. He fell almost instantly for her looks, and so much so that he even converted to Mormonism to be with Lori. That's the kind of influence that she had on men. So when Lori married him in 2001, this made him her 3rd husband, and he legally adopted her son Colby. They settled down in Austin, Texas, and in 2002 they welcomed a little girl who they named Tylee. And Lori said that their life was perfect. She even made an appearance on Wheel of Fortune. She talked about her wonderful husband who was at home watching their 2 beautiful children, but it didn't take long for the marriage to deteriorate.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pat Sajak and Vanna White.
Here they come. Thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Hello there. How you doing, Lori?
I'm good.
Lori
How are
Ryan
you?
from Austin, Texas.
That's right.
A hairstylist in Austin, hey?
That's right. The best.
How's the hair in Austin?
It's good.
Good.
Austin's a happening place.
Probably thanks to you.
Pretty much.
Talk about your family a little bit.
I have a wonderful husband, Joseph, at home, who is watching our two beautiful children, Colby, who's 7, and Tylee, who is 1.
Yeah, what do you guys like to do for fun?
We like to play all kinds of sports on our 3 acres.
Okay, sounds like you have a nice life there.
We do.
Congratulations.
Thank
Nice to have you with us.
Shortly after this, the couple ended up getting a divorce in 2005, and there was a contentious custody battle over little Tylee. In fact, Lori accused Joe of sexually abusing their children, a claim that was never verified in court. In 2007, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, assaulted Joe with a taser during a custody exchange. And we are going to talk about Alex in a bit. In April of 2019, Joe Ryan was found deceased in his Phoenix apartment. His body remained undiscovered for about a week until neighbors reported a foul odor coming from his place. The medical examiner determined that Joe had died from natural causes. And after his death, his family raised concerns about Lori's behavior. I mean, she didn't inform them about his passing at all. And his sister, well, her name is Annie Cushing, she said that Lori once remarked, "The world is a better place without Joe Ryan." It was during this custody battle that Lori met Charles Vallow. He was from Louisiana. He was a successful businessman who had 2 failed marriages of his own. And Charles, he was a family man. And in 2006, he became Lori's 4th husband. Her marriage to Charles was very different from her previous marriages. And she was even able to work less hours. And she was able to spend more time at home with little Tylee. So Joshua Jackson was born on the 25th of May 2012 in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Manda Lynn, who was Charles' sister, and Manda was said to be struggling with substance abuse and a few personal issues that she had. And of course, she couldn't take care of little JJ. JJ was diagnosed with autism at an early age. He needed a lot of care. So his grandparents, Kay and Mary Woodcock, stepped in and they took care of him. Kay was very overwhelmed by the demands of raising a child with special needs, especially because she was nearing retirement. So that is when Charles and Lori approached Kay and Larry, and they said that they would adopt little JJ. They agreed because they felt that they wanted JJ to have brothers and sisters, but because of their age, this would not be something they would be able to give him. And so they made the difficult decision to give him up for adoption, if they could continue to be part of his life. And of course, Charles and Lori promised to give little JJ a stable home, and the adoption was finalized in 2013 when JJ was just about a year old. And JJ adapted really well. Charles made sure that he had the very best schools and early interventions, and he was thriving in their family. Everyone adored JJ. Lori and Charles then moved from Texas to Arizona, and they even lived in Hawaii for some time. Charles made sure that it was warm wherever they went because Lori despised the cold. I can relate to this, but it's not just another fun fact, because this would become another red flag in this whole story. By 2017, the family settled in Phoenix, Arizona, where Lori remained committed to her religion. She was a devout member of the LDS Church, and Charles, who was previously Catholic, he converted to Mormonism also in order to support Lori and to help unify their family. So Lori was a leader over all of these children in the church, and it said that The children absolutely adored her. They described her as a really fun teacher. Not only that, but Laurie also held a temple recommend. This meant that she was considered worthy by LDS standards, and she could also enter Mormon temples, which was kind of a sign of her dedication at the time. Others said that Laurie started to become a little bit more extreme. So in 2018, her beliefs took a very dark and radical turn when she started to read books. And some of these books were Chad's books and those of authors that he had published. She was absolutely fascinated with spirits possessing bodies, visions of Christ, the end times, and becoming one of the 144,000, a biblical number of chosen people spoken of in the book of Revelations. And she was actually attempting to influence those around her with these very same teachings. So she stopped attending the regular LDS services and she began participating in fringe spiritual gatherings. She said things like, "The Lord is calling people to fulfill their missions and that He is going to be coming," and that she was preparing people for the end days. Her brother, Alex Cox, was excommunicated from the church in 2007, and this was for sexual deviancy. Also, remember earlier when I mentioned that he tasered Laurie's husband, Joseph Ryan? Well, he also threatened to kill him. This marked a major turning point in his personal and his spiritual life. So Laurie encouraged Alex to read books and to listen to podcasts, and these aligned with her radical beliefs. So according to sources, Laurie loved the book Visions of Glory by John Pontius, and this book was very controversial, even within the LDS Church. Visions of Glory was published in 2012, and it presents a series of supposed spiritual visions and near-death experiences of an anonymous man referred to as Spencer. And Chad, well, he also spoke about this book quite a lot, and the visionary in the book named Spencer. And he would mention this book at all these speeches that he was giving and at the Doomsday conferences. And the book talks about what will happen before the second coming of Christ. It talks about the civil unrest, specifically in the US. It talks about evil spirits entering bodies, tent cities, and knowing people from past lives. And that some people are so evil, they will be better off being killed before Christ comes again. Yes. And even today, this book is still being promoted and read by some of the very influential people, some celebrities, but that's a whole story on its own, which I'm not going to get into right now. So Laurie and Alex, they were reading all of these books, and in 2016, Laurie started reading the Doomsday novels written by Chad himself. Chad wrote an autobiography where he described having 2 near-death experiences, and according to him, this lifted the veil. He was described as gifted and being able to see energies. This led to more talks about his visions, and he could talk a lot. Chad said that he had 2 near-death experiences, and this led to his ability to receive these visions. He stated, "My torn veil allows information to be downloaded into my brain from the other side." Yes, end quote. I just want to add that there's a lot we don't understand about the spiritual world. So I'm not saying that people don't have these gifts, but Chad, in my opinion, was not one of them. So Chad was then listed as a co-author on a book titled Dreams, Visions and Testimonies. This gave Chad a big platform where he could share his visions, and one of them was establishing a new Jerusalem. Only the most righteous members of the LDS faith who diligently prepared for the second coming of Jesus Christ would be called to the mountains to set up what Chad called white camps. In other words, there were these little white tents which would house those who were saved. They would have supplies of food. I know this sounds like a lot to take in because none of it makes sense to me. But I want to give you an idea of how entitled these people really are. I mean, believing that their gift somehow made them superior to everyone else. You see, until now, Chad's books, like Standing in Holy Places, were all fiction. But now, Chad was saying that these stories were all true. And they were all true versions of real events that would happen soon. He used these claims to build some kind of credibility and gain a niche audience. And despite the claims that he made a lot of money, reports suggest otherwise. The amount was roughly about $2,000 a year in personal profits from book sales. But he did gain a following with appearances on platforms like Preparing a People, where he spoke as a visionary expert, which almost gave him this kind of cult-like status. Laurie and Chad officially met in October of 2018 at a Doomsday LDS conference in St. George, Utah, where he was a speaker promoting his apocalyptic novels and bizarre spiritual beliefs. And Laurie, who was already a fan of his work, was immediately drawn to him. So after this conference, both Chad and Laurie, well, they went their separate ways. Remember, at this point, they were both still married and they had families. But just 2 days later, Chad emailed Laurie about some of his additional beliefs. He told Laurie that he was not just a visionary, but that he had the power to discern who was light and who was dark. And in this same email, which Laurie had actually requested from Chad, Chad labeled each member of her family as either light or dark, good or bad, or evil or righteous. While everyone was labeled light, Laurie's daughter Tylee was not. She was labeled not only dark, but very dark, according to Chad. It didn't take long for others in Laurie's life to become labeled as dark either. Soon, Chad called Laurie and he told her that her husband, Charles, was not only dark, but he was a zombie, inhabited by a dark spirit called Ned Schneider.
What's going on? Why is she here and you're not here, or are you staying here with her?
Long story. She's had kind of a breakthrough reality. She thinks you're LDS?
Yes.
She thinks she's married to Moroni in the past. This is her
You think she's what?
was married to Moroni at the top of the temple.
Angel
Moroni.
LDS. Angel.
They don't let me in there.
Probation, and she knows when the second coming is happening next year. So does the prophet.
Okay.
He knows it. She knows about it. She meets with Moroni and Jesus Christ face to face in the temple every day. I've tried to support her as much as I could, but it's gotten really, really bad lately. She's had a break. She says, I'm Nick Schneider. I've taken over Charles's body, and Charles has been killed. I'm going to kill you. You're going to be murdered today.
Her best friend Melanie happened to be there when Chad was on this call to Laurie, and Melanie knew Chad long before she knew Laurie, and it said that Chad initially had his eye on Melanie until the day he had met Laurie at the conference. In fact, he told them that he had been married to both of them in a past life. If he was downloading information from the other side, why would a demon have a name or a normal name like Ned? Why wouldn't it be Beelzebub, Azazel, Baphomet, or something like that? I mean, when you pronounce it, it would make the whole room start shaking. Any demonic name would. So just hearing the sounds of some of these names or real demons is so frightening. And this isn't just me. These names have been associated with ultimate evil for thousands of years. Demonic names often have very harsh consonants, like these deep grumbling sounds, and it usually triggers extreme discomfort or unease. Not Ned. Ned. I mean, it doesn't even sound right. It must be some kind of low-class demon. Anyways, Chad was telling them about these casting parties, and these were exorcism parties to release these evil entities out of someone's body. So basically, it was to command the spirits or the evil spirits be bound and contained until they repent or they receive their final judgment. Charles became terrified when Laurie accused him of not being himself anymore. I mean, it wasn't only that, but she started to call him Ned. And Charles had no idea about these casting out parties. But that, along with being called a zombie, was enough for Charles to seek help. And he called the police and he told them that he feared Laurie. He was concerned about the safety of his children and he was concerned for his own safety. So when police interviewed him, he told them that Laurie had threatened him, and she threatened him with her powers. She'd taken also about $35,000 from his bank account. So when police didn't believe Charles initially, he went to the bishop of the church. And he told this bishop that Laurie claimed to be a translated being preparing for the second coming, and said that Jesus spoke to her daily. She also said that she no longer needed to eat or sleep, and the bishop, well, he couldn't really do much. At that point, Laurie hadn't really committed any crimes, but Charles was trying to seek help anywhere that he could. So he started emailing friends, and he also started to record evidence, trying to get mental health assessments or interventions for her. But it seemed as if nobody believed him. Charles even sent an email to Tammy Daybell to tell her about the affair. So these casting parties continued, obviously without Charles knowing anything at all. But he was in fact a target of these ceremonies they had. So they would gather in a circle and they would use specific prayers, chants, and visualization techniques. And Chad became very concerned. He told Laurie that Ned was staying in Charles's body, and once Ned was finally removed, that's when Chad said that a more advanced spirit had entered Charles. And this spirit was named Hiplos. And according to Chad, there was only one option left. This is the moment where things quickly went from troubling to terrifying. At this point, Charles and Laurie were already separated. In February of 2019, he filed for divorce, citing concerns for his safety and that of his children. So on the 10th of July 2019, Laurie asked her older brother, Alex Cox, to spend the night at her house in order to protect her from this dark spirit. The following morning, on the 11th of July, Charles showed up, and this was to take their son JJ to school. But that never happened because he was shot by Alex. And in police interviews, according to Laurie and Alex, Charles had struck Alex with a baseball bat. And this is when Alex took out his firearm and he shot Charles twice in the chest. So Laurie was very calm about this. I mean, she didn't notify the police again, or she didn't call 911. It was 45 minutes later that Alex made the call to 911. And when officers arrived, Laurie was seen smiling and almost detached. She was even making light-hearted remarks about the whole situation. She left the scene so casually with JJ in tow. She dropped him off at school and then made stops at Burger King and Walgreens. Just going about her life like it was another normal day. Now, most of us would be beside ourselves, we'd be freaked out, but not Lori, not at all. Alex said that he performed CPR, but first responders could see that this wasn't true. Also, one bullet was fired into Charles's body while he was lying down on the floor. And that's not even the worst of it, because when Lori returned, she was actually smiling and she was acting as if nothing at all had happened, and neither of them were detained. And this is obviously because, the situation was being treated as a justified homicide or self-defense, as Alex had claimed. It would take 2 years before those charges finally came. So shortly after Charles was killed, Lori moved to Rexburg, Idaho, along with 16-year-old Tylee and little JJ, who was 7 at the time. Remember I said that Lori despised the cold weather. Rexburg, Idaho is so cold that the temperature drops to below 0. There's that wind chill factor, which makes it seem even colder. And during the winter, there is a lot of snow. So this was the very first time that she was away from the warmer weather in her life. But Lori decided that she would leave behind her oldest son, Colby, his wife, and her first granddaughter. And Alex, her brother, well, he also moved up to Idaho. Alex was deeply influenced by Chad's teachings, and initially he was considered a first creation with a low light rating, but later Chad claimed that Alex had been exalted. In other words, this elevated his spiritual standing. Alex was designated as a warrior, and his task was to protect Lori. He participated in these castings, and by November of that year, Chad gave Alex a patriarchal blessing where he praised Alex as a messenger of the Lord. Tylee Ryan was last seen alive on the 6th of September 2019. This was during a trip to Yellowstone National Park. She was with her mother Lori, JJ, and her uncle Alex Cox. There's one photo from that day that still haunts everyone. Tylee was smiling with her arms wrapped lovingly around JJ. Tylee, and she wasn't just any teenager. She was smart, she was sweet. I know we say this about victims a lot. She was very loyal to her family, but especially to her mother, Lori. Friends and family said that they were incredibly close, almost like best friends. And Tylee would do absolutely anything for her mother. So not long after that trip, Lori began referring to Tylee as a zombie. Yes, you heard that right. And as I mentioned before, Chad labeled Tylee as not only dark, but very dark. And Lori told Tylee this. She said that she was a zombie, to which Tylee responded, "No, Mom, not me." Just 2 weeks later, JJ disappeared as well. Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend, David Warwick, were visiting Lori. So they were there to record a podcast and also to attend a Doomsday conference. So during this visit, Lori actually told Melanie that she suspected that JJ was also a zombie. They asked where JJ was, but Lori and Chad weren't telling them anything. So they were very suspicious because Lori had said that JJ was possessed, and what she described is that he'd been crawling all over the cabinets and the fridge, and that he had knocked down a picture of Jesus. But despite their concern, they decided to go back down to Utah, and JJ's grandparents, Kate and Larry Woodcock, also couldn't get a hold of JJ. You see, since Charles had been killed in July, all communication with him had been cut off. In fact, when they learned that Charles had been killed by Alex, they were certain that it was not self-defense. They said that he was not a violent man at all. Another thing is that Kate had received Charles' life insurance money, and this is because Charles told them that if anything happens to me, you can know that it's Laurie and Alex. And he even told Kate that Laurie did not want JJ anymore, and that he wanted them to have the money so that they could look after JJ. In fact, it wasn't too long before his death that Charles changed his life insurance policy. You see, Laurie was initially the main beneficiary, but he changed that without telling her anything, and he left everything to his sister Kate. Also, when they learned that Charles had died, they flew from Louisiana to Utah to demand answers. And this is where they learned that Laurie was actually involved in this strange cult. Remember, before this, they knew absolutely nothing about anything that Laurie was involved in. So they started communicating with a man named Brandon Boudreaux. Now, Brandon had been married to Laurie's niece, and her name was also Melanie, but the two of them were now divorced, Brandon and Melanie, because Melanie had left Brandon to move to Idaho to be with her Aunt Laurie. So Brandon told the Woodcocks everything that he knew about Chad Daybell and about Laurie, also about Melanie's strange beliefs and how loyal she actually was to her aunt. Now, they were so shocked when they heard these things from Brandon, and actually all they wanted was to find out where they could find little JJ. On the morning of the 2nd of October 2019, about a week after JJ was last seen, Brandon returned home from gym. And this is when a bullet shattered his car window, just missing him. So police, well, they went in and they searched the house. I mean, they wanted to check if anyone was inside, or maybe there had been a burglary, but that wasn't the case. So Brandon took his children, and he also took urgent steps to protect them. He filed for sole custody, and he moved to another state, and he went into hiding. And Melanie, well, she took to social media saying that Brandon had actually kidnapped their children. So police now believe that that shot was fired by Alex Cox from a Jeep Wrangler that was registered to none other than Charles Vallow. And just 2 weeks later, in the early hours of the morning, on October the 19th, while Laurie was out of town in Hawaii, Chad Daybell made a 911 call. His 49-year-old wife, Tammy Daybell, was dead.
Okay, can I get your name?
Chad Daybell? Oh, man. Oh.
Okay, Chad, I'm going to get somebody out to you right now, okay?
You have a corner where the blinking yellow light is with the red house?
Yes, sir. Red house on the corner.
Yes.
Blinking yellow light.
Right.
Okay. We'll get somebody out to you, okay? I'm so sorry.
Okay.
If you need anything else, you call me back, okay?
Okay.
Okay, bye-bye.
And according to Chad, Tammy, who had been his wife and the mother to his 5 adult children, had simply died in her sleep. There were absolutely no signs of illness, just a minor cough that had been there the night before. Chad told authorities that he woke up to find Tammy unresponsive. He said that he attempted CPR and that while he was doing chest compressions, pink foam came from Tammy's mouth. That's a detail often associated with fluid in the lungs or asphyxiation. And Chad said he had been wiping away this foam in order to try and help her. And despite the unusual circumstances, Chad declined an autopsy, and her death was ruled as natural. Tammy, who was, by all accounts, a healthy woman that loved Zumba, was buried 3 days later in her hometown of Springville, Utah. Just 10 days earlier, a man in a ski mask approached Tammy in her driveway. he was aiming what she believed at the time to be a paintball gun, and he was aiming it right at her, but she somehow managed to scare him off. So, of course, when Brandon found out about this and Tammy's death, he was really scared, and he immediately called Kate Woodcock, and he told her all this news. But, of course, the truth always comes out, because when investigators started digging around, they found messages between Chad and Laurie where Chad says that Tammy was also a zombie and that she was possessed by an evil spirit named Vallow. Yes, another weird name. And on November the 5th, exactly 14 days later, after Tammy was buried, Chad and Laurie smiled for wedding photos on a beach in Hawaii, ukulele in hand, and Laurie was dancing and giggling for the cameras. Back at home, Kate and Larry Woodcock were begging for answers, and Kate, who I mentioned before was cut off from JJ, well, she had no idea where they were, and so she started looking into things herself, and she discovered Laurie's address by logging into Charles' Amazon account. And what they saw was that Laurie had purchased wedding rings before Tammy's death. And that's when Kate called the Rexburg police to request a welfare check.
Hi, Laurie. Laurie, I'm Lieutenant Ball, Police Department. How are you? You got a minute? You alone or you got help?
My brother's here.
Okay. You take these gloves.
See you, Jim.
So, we're here.
Oh, this is a big mess. I just talked to the guy on the phone.
And what did he ask you?
He was just saying that he wanted to do a will check on JJ.
So, JJ would be where?
He's in Arizona.
Who's he with in Arizona?
He's with one of my friends in Arizona.
Oh. Okay. You got a notepad?
So by this time, Chad and Laurie had already returned to Idaho. So when police knocked on Laurie's door on the 26th of November, Laurie answered, and she pretended to barely know Chad at all. She said, "Oh, Chad, he's just a friend of my brother." She also told police that Tylee was attending BYU Idaho and that JJ was in Arizona with her friend Melanie Gibb. When police called to confirm this story with Melanie, she was pressured, of course, by Chad and Laurie, and she lied and she said that yes, JJ was with her, but just a few days later the guilt and fear consumed her, and she confessed to authorities that JJ hadn't been with her and she hadn't seen him since September. Just after Thanksgiving in 2019, police went back to Laurie's place, and this time they had a search warrant. But Laurie and Chad, well, they were gone, and in December of 2019, the media announced that the children were missing. And in a press release, Rexburg police asked for the public's help in finding the couple, as well as help in finding these two missing children. And it didn't take very long for police to discover Laurie and Chad staying in a gated community in Kauai. On the 20th of February 2020, Laurie Vallow was arrested in Princeville, Hawaii, facing charges including 2 felony counts of desertion and non-support of dependent children, as well as resisting or obstructing officers, criminal solicitation to commit a crime, and contempt of court. Chad attended all of Laurie's court hearings, and not only that, but he asked church members and neighbors to take loans out on their homes, and this was to post bail for his new wife. So many of them would have been very willing to do it. I mean, because they trusted Chad, they liked him. But now, with these children missing, they declined. They were not going to get themselves involved because now there were 2 missing children. And this was very concerning. And this is strange to me because he was never asking anybody to help him look for his children at all. According to Chad, this was all just some big misunderstanding, and he told everyone that he knew that this was because of a custody battle that had been started by Kate and Larry Woodcock, that they were trying to get their hands on the children, so the children were somewhere in hiding. Many of the church members actually believed this. They really believed that the children were being kept safe somewhere. In fact, even Laurie's family, like her mother and her sister, they also believed this story, but not Chad's brother. Matt Daybell and his wife, Heather, well, they weren't impressed with Chad's beliefs, and they told the police as much. So in June of 2020, investigators conducted a search of Chad Daybell's property. They used cell phone data from Alex Cox's phone to identify areas of interest. His phone had pinged near specific spots on the 9th and the 23rd of September 2019, shortly after the children were last seen. On the 9th of June 2020, investigators focused on two key areas: a fire pit near Pet Cemetery and a patch of disturbed ground under a tree. At first, they uncovered charred human remains. Later, this was identified as Tylee's. The second site revealed J.J. Vallow's body. It was wrapped in plastic and buried beneath layers of earth and stone. Tylee's body was mutilated, burnt, dismembered, and little 7-year-old JJ was wrapped head to toe in duct tape. He was still wearing the same pajamas that he was last seen in. He was also wearing a pull-up diaper. Chad was immediately arrested that same day. Investigators also found a silver necklace believed to be Tylee's, as well as tools like a pickaxe and a shovel, and that came from a nearby farm. In Laurie's home, in her garage, they found gun magazines, silencers, a camo suit, knives, handgun, a frightening Halloween mask, bag with rope, duct tape, Alex Cox's passport, emails from Chad, and a cell phone. In her other apartment, which is where Alex was spending most of his time, they found guns, army-type knives, empty magazines, various weapons. In Alex's closet, a hazmat-looking white suit. In a jail call with Laurie's sister Summer, there was this huge fight where Summer was actually screaming at Laurie because of her lack of emotion and that the children never received a proper burial. That Laurie was so busy taking pictures in Hawaii for her wedding that she just simply didn't care about anything at all. Summer also accused Laurie of showing no emotion, and Laurie continued to collect social security checks for her children who were no longer alive. In May of 2021, both Laurie and Chad were indicted on charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the deaths of JJ, Tylee, and Tammy Daybell. The trial of Laurie Vallow began on the 3rd of April 2023 in Idaho, and by the 12th of May, her defense team claimed that she didn't participate in the murders at all. She was manipulated by Chad, according to them, and they said that there was no direct evidence tying her to the scene of the murders. They also said that Laurie genuinely believed that her children were safe and happy in the afterlife. Digital evidence showed several texts between Laurie and Chad.
On Monday, FBI investigator Douglas Hart spent hours reading Laurie Vallow's text messages. Most of those conversations were between Laurie and her current husband, Chad Daybell.
It was clear to investigators that the relationship between Chad Daybell and Laurie Vallow was a driving force behind the crimes that have been alleged in this case.
Hart started reading messages sent on July 15, 2019. At the time, Lori's previous husband, Charles Vallow, had just died, and Chad was still married to Tammy Daybell.
From Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow, I know you won't get this text for another hour or so, but my love for you is overflowing right now. I just want to hold you endlessly. You are my wonderful best friend that I can't live without. From Lori Vallow to Chad Daybell, and yet you are so sad.
While some of the messages were romantic, a lot of them revolved around Vallow's kids, JJ and Tylee Ryan. Both kids were brutally murdered in September 2019. Before their deaths, Hart said the couple talked about demons possessing JJ and Tylee's bodies.
From Chad Daybell to Lori Vallow, she is at 0.13. I turned up the pain to 10 and placed a spiritual virus in her. He is at 99.99.
They considered both kids dark spirits.
Describing the children as zombies. Zombies, yes. Lori's Google searches included disturbing phrases like what kind of poison kills quickly and how to get rid of a demon. Her behavior in court was also really strange. She was seen smiling or seemingly unfazed at times. So Lori was found guilty of all charges, including the murders of her 2 children and conspiracy to commit murder, Tammy Daybell, and for this she received 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And during the sentencing, she quoted scripture, saying they were busy and happy in heaven. Of course, that would not be the end of Lori. So going back to the previous year, on the 12th of December 2019, Alex Cox died suddenly. He was at the home of his new wife, Zulema Pastenis. This was in Arizona, and just 2 weeks before, the 2 of them had eloped in a small little chapel in Las Vegas. There were no friends or family that were present. So actually, Alex died even before the children were found, but not before Tammy's body was exhumed from the Springfield Cemetery. So his death happened less than a day after Tammy's body was exhumed. Yes, they did decide that they were going to exhume her, and an autopsy was performed, and the cause of death was stated as asphyxiation, indicating that Tammy Daybell had been suffocated. She also had bruises on her arms and her chest that were consistent with being restrained. And remember that Chad had given Alex that patriarchal blessing just a few weeks before.
Give you a patriarchal blessing as part of the member of the Church of the Firstborn that you have earned the privilege to be a member of. I do so by the power of the Melchizedek priesthood which I hold, and in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior, who has authorized this blessing. It is grateful that you're receiving it as you move forward in your life. And we're selected by the Savior himself to be part of the 4th creation. Great warriors were needed in that creation. Powerful goddesses were needed to be protected, and you were selected to help protect your sister.
He told Alex that he had accomplished so much already and that he would know when the time was right to go to the other side. He also told him that when the time came, Alex would be welcomed by the Savior himself. And not only that, but on the day that Alex died, Chad gave him another blessing. This time it was over the phone. And despite the suspicion surrounding Alex's passing, wait for it, his death was deemed natural, a pulmonary embolism. Although Lori's trial was not televised, Chad Daybell's was. So on the 1st of April 2024, Chad Daybell stood trial in Boise, Idaho for the murders of his first wife, Tammy Daybell, the murders of Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow. He was charged with first-degree murder in all 3 deaths. He was also charged with conspiracy to commit murder, grand theft by deception for stealing Social Security benefits after the children's deaths, and insurance fraud related to the $430,000 life insurance policy that he had on his wife Tammy. Prosecutors revealed how Chad and Lori used extreme religious beliefs to justify the killings, and that they were willing to remove anyone that they saw as obstacles. On the 30th of May, a jury found Chad guilty on all counts, and just days later, on the 1st of June, the same jury unanimously sentenced him to death, with an additional 15-year sentence for insurance fraud.
Counts 1 through 6, and again, this is an unusual hearing because the sentencing hearing's already been taking place. We've heard from the victims through impact statements and arguments from counsel. That's already taken place. In addition, a pre-sentence investigation report is not to be ordered in these hearings, so the court does not reference that. The court then orders as follows, and this will be contained in the court's judgment at the conclusion of the case. As to count 1, the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and grand theft by deception for the murder of Tylee Ryan, upon the jury's finding of guilty and return of the special verdict form, the jury finding beyond a reasonable doubt and having returned the special verdict that the aggravating circumstances when weighed against the mitigating circumstances do not make the imposition of the death penalty unjust. The court, therefore, on count 1, the defendant is sentenced to death. On count 2, the first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan, the jury finding beyond a reasonable doubt and having returned the special verdict that the aggravating circumstances when weighed against the mitigating circumstances do not make the imposition of the death penalty unjust. The court, therefore, on count 2, sentences the defendant to death. On count 3, the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and grand theft by deception for the murder of J.J. Vallow, the jury finding beyond a reasonable doubt and having returned the special verdict that the aggravating circumstances when weighed against the mitigating circumstances do not make the imposition of the death penalty unjust. The court, therefore, on count 3, sentences the defendant to death.
He has, of course, started his appeals process. I mean, what is he going to do if he ever gets out? Get a job as a grave digger? I don't know. But Lori herself, well, she finally got her time in the spotlight recently, and this time was for the conspiracy to murder her 4th husband, Charles Vallow. And in a true plot twist that nobody asked for, Lori decided that she was going to represent herself, yes. The woman who once thought she was a goddess, chosen to lead the 144,000 through the end times, figured that she would try her hand at being a defense attorney. And it went about as well as you might expect from someone who thinks that zombies are real people with dark and evil spirits. In her opening statement, of course, Lori seemed so filled with remorse over the deaths of her children and also that of Tammy Daybell. She was saying that Jesus knows the truth. Well, he sure does. There were a lot of dramatics with her cross-questioning witnesses on the stand, but there was no evidence. Who was she going to call to testify on her behalf? I mean, the one person who would have been a great witness was Tammy. That was the daughter who always stood up for Lori. She was the one who loved her mother more than anything in the world. The one person who would have taken her side against Charles. And Lori took her life. Prosecutors said that Lori helped plot Charles's death to get her hands on his life insurance and to free herself to chase after Chad. And the jury was unimpressed. They found her guilty after just 3 hours. And before you think that Lori Vallow Daybell is going to disappear and just serve out her life sentence, think again, because there is another trial coming, and this one is for conspiring to murder her niece's ex-husband. Remember, I talked about Brandon Boudreaux, and it's alleged that Lori's motive was to remove Brandon from the picture in order to aid her niece Melanie in a custody battle. And Lori will be representing herself again. The next trial is set to begin early in June of 2025, and if she's convicted, Lori will add another life sentence to her collection. I wanted to add in my thoughts on James the Less, the one who Chad claimed he was in a previous life. James was one of the 12 apostles and the son of Alphaeus. He was actually a quiet follower of Christ. Although called the Less, his legacy in the church is far from small. He's honored as a martyr and a saint, with his feast day being celebrated on the 3rd of May. So you can just imagine Chad not just chasing the end times, because, well, we all know what happened to James. So if Chad really lived through that, being tossed off a temple roof and clubbed to death, if he remembered all of that, why is he now on death row? Why would he put himself there? Stories like this truly disturb me, not only because of all the unnecessary lives that were lost, but especially where there are children involved. And nobody can believe that these two were so delusional that they actually believed any of this. Doomsday prophecies, or I don't know, did they? Sometimes evil hides behind faith or charm, and that's exactly what I think this was. The pickup line, "we were married in a past life," is probably the worst I've ever come across. I think that would send most women running so fast, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you think of the whole case? And we've come to the end of today's case. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, share on your way out if you like this video. I do appreciate your comments and suggestions. Until next time, Godspeed.